Undercover boss buys a truck at his own dealership. Could not believe what he hears from a customer behind him. For years, Thompson Auto Group was a name that families across the country trusted. A dealership built on fairness, transparency, and customer-first service. But recently, something had changed. The once stellar reputation was starting to crack. Complaints were rolling in. Customers claimed they were being misled, pressured, and overcharged. Hidden fees, manipulated contracts, families walking away with broken trust instead of new vehicles. Michael Thompson, the CEO, couldn't ignore it any longer. This wasn't just business, it was personal. Michael had built this company from nothing. 15 years ago, he was just another young entrepreneur with a dream, selling cars from a tiny lot with a single desk in a used coffee machine. Through grit, integrity, and relentless work, he turned that small dealership into a multi-state empire. Now, Thompson Auto Group was one of the biggest names in the industry, but expansion came at a price. Michael had stepped away from the front lines, trusting his managers to uphold his values. That trust had been broken. The online reviews told the story. Customers were furious, single mothers being overcharged for unreliable cars. Veterans promised one price, only to sign contracts for thousands more. Working-class families tricked into bad loans they couldn't afford. It was the kind of behavior Michael had fought against his whole career, and now it was happening under his own name. His board of directors insisted it was nothing. All dealerships get complaints, they said. Sales are higher than ever. But Michael knew better. A growing business meant nothing if it was built on lies. So he made a decision. He had to go undercover. He wouldn't be CEO Michael Thompson anymore. He had to be someone else, someone the staff wouldn't recognize. He traded his tailored suits for faded jeans and a worn-out hoodie. The Rolex came off, replaced by an old digital watch from Walmart. He even let his normally sharp beard grow out, adding a few days of stubble. The final touch? His old, dented Toyota Corolla. No more luxury sedans, no private drivers, just a man looking for a fair deal. His alias, Mike Carter, a blue-collar construction worker from Detroit, recently moved to town for work. A man looking to buy a reliable truck with his hard-earned savings. Michael knew the game. He had started as a salesman himself. He had spent years on those lots, shaking hands, making deals. He knew the tricks, the pressure tactics, the fake special discounts that were anything but special. If his employees were scamming customers, he would see it firsthand. And if they were, he would make sure it never happened again. As he pulled into the lot of Thompson Auto Group, the place he had built from the ground up, a strange feeling settled in his chest. Today, he wasn't the boss. He was just another customer. And what he was about to uncover would change everything. As soon as Michael stepped onto the lot, the change in the air was palpable. Gone were the familiar warm welcomes he'd once seen here, the handshakes that had greeted every customer like family. Now, as he walked deeper into the lot, the salesmen were eyeing him like a fresh mark, sizing him up, calculating their commission. It wasn't just about selling a truck. It was about exploiting every penny. He wasn't a valued customer. He was a target. Michael felt a sharp pang of disappointment. His instincts were telling him something wasn't right. This wasn't the dealership his father had built. This wasn't the legacy they had worked so hard to create. Out of the corner of his eye, Michael saw a young salesman walking toward him. Eric. The guy was clearly new, eager, and wearing a crisp but slightly too polished shirt that didn't quite match the more relaxed atmosphere of the dealership. His steps were quick and purposeful, but there was something about the way he moved that screamed desperation. He was trying to project confidence, but Michael could see the edges of nervousness creeping into his demeanor. Eric smiled wide, almost too wide, like a salesman trying to land his first big sale. Michael immediately picked up on the hunger behind that grin, the kind of hunger that came from someone who would do anything to close a deal, regardless of the consequences. Eric enthusiastically, almost too eagerly, "Hey there, welcome to Thompson Auto. You looking for a truck today?" Michael nodded, keeping his tone neutral but firm. His experience in the industry told him that this was the moment when everything could go wrong, when a salesman could either be sincere or try to push an unnecessary deal. Michael, casually, "Yeah, I need something reliable for work. Been saving up for a while now. Budget's about $35,000. As soon as the number left his lips, Eric's smile faltered, just for a split second, but it was enough for Michael to notice. The young salesman's gaze flickered nervously to the sky, then back to Michael, as if calculating how far he could push this deal. Eric, in a more calculated tone, "Well, you're in luck. We've got some great options here. This right here is a 2019 Ford F-150. Great engine, excellent towing capacity, perfect for someone in your line of work." He motioned to a truck, his voice growing more enthusiastic with every word. "This beauty has all the features you need. Power, durability, and it's a steal at $40,000. You'll never regret it." Michael paused, glancing at the truck. It was a solid vehicle, no doubt, but the price was far above what he'd mentioned. He kept his expression neutral, masking the anger rising in his chest. It was clear that Eric was trying to push him into a sale above his budget, hoping he wouldn't notice the extra costs hidden in the deal. Michael, quietly trying to maintain his composure, "That's a little over my budget. I told you $35,000. Eric hesitated for a moment, clearly thrown off by the pushback, but then he quickly regained his smile, tightening it, trying to hide his impatience. Eric, forcing a more friendly tone, "Oh, sure. But trust me, you don't want to settle for less. The F-150's resale value is unmatched. This truck will last you for years. You don't want to get stuck with something cheaper and regret it later, right?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Besides, we've got some wiggle room. I'm sure we can find a way to make it work for you." But Michael wasn't buying it. He wasn't just another customer being strung along by sweet words. He was listening, and his attention had shifted, his eyes narrowing as he overheard something that sent a cold chill through his spine. From behind, a voice broke through the sales pitch. It was sharp and cutting, sending a shiver down Michael's spine. Dan Reynolds, the dealership manager, his voice cold and commanding. "Mr. Henderson, you need to understand, those fees aren't optional, they're mandatory." Michael's head snapped toward the sound of the argument. He could see a frail, elderly man, Mark Henderson, standing across the lot. The old man's face was pale with frustration, his hands trembling slightly as he held a contract in one hand. The manager, Dan Reynolds, was standing in front of him. His posture was rigid, his face a mask of authority, but his tone was condescending. Michael could feel the power dynamic shift as Dan made it clear who held the upper hand. The way he spoke to the elderly man was almost dismissive, as if the customer's discomfort didn't matter. Only the sale did. Mark Henderson, with a shaking voice, But this wasn't what we agreed on. Josh said the truck would be $32,000, not $35,000. I can't afford that much. My daughter's about to go to college. This is all I have." Michael's heart sank. He could see the desperation in the man's face, the weight of the decision pressing on him, and it hit him like a ton of bricks. This was what the dealership had become, a place where people's financial security was being stolen, bit by bit. He could feel the anger rising, but he stayed still, listening. Dan Reynolds, snapping, his tone dripping with arrogance. "Josh isn't here anymore, Mr. Henderson. Verbal agreements mean nothing. This contract clearly shows a market adjustment fee, extended warranty, and a premium service package. These are standard fees, not up for discussion." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his smug smile growing. Mark Henderson pleading, his voice cracking. "But I can't afford any of that. This is all I've saved up for my daughter's education." Michael clenched his fists, feeling his pulse quicken. He'd seen this manipulation before. His father had fallen victim to similar scams years ago, back when the dealership was just a small lot. It disgusted him to see it happening again, but this time he wasn't going to stand by. Dan Reynolds, coldly looking down at the contract. "Maybe you should have read the fine print more carefully, Mr. Henderson. Not my problem if you didn't." The elderly man's shoulders sagged, and Michael felt the crushing weight of helplessness settle in his chest. This was beyond unfair. It was exploitation. Michael's anger flared, but he stayed calm. Every word, every hesitation from Eric felt like a betrayal to everything his father had built. This was the dealership where honesty used to be the backbone of the business. But now, Now it was a house of cards, all built on lies and manipulation. Michael had to hold himself together. The truth would come out, but he had to approach this carefully. He leaned toward Eric, lowering his voice just enough to keep it between them, trying to act casual, though every fiber of his being screamed for action. Michael, quietly, almost conversationally, "Are these fees gonna pop up on my deal too?" Eric hesitated, his gaze darting nervously between Michael and the lot behind them, as though he might find some escape route in the chaos. Michael could feel the tension in the air, Eric's mind racing, trying to decide if he should lie or tell the truth. The sweat on his brow was telling. Eric, stammering, trying to remain confident. Maybe. Mr. Reynolds decides final prices, but you know, some deals are special." Michael's eyes didn't leave Eric's face, watching the subtle shifts in his expression, the way his lips quivered just slightly. The words were dripping with half-truths, but Michael could tell that something bigger was brewing here. Michael, leaning in, speaking low and steady, "And those special deals, can you make them go away?" The moment the words left his mouth, Michael could see the fear take over Eric's face. The young salesman swallowed hard, his throat working like a man caught in a trap, trying to decide how much he could reveal without getting himself into deeper trouble. His gaze dropped to the floor for a second, as though the truth was too heavy to face. Eric, voice barely a whisper, reluctant, "Not unless you're willing to pay under the table. Dan, he handles the special cases." Michael's blood ran cold, but he didn't flinch. Instead, a cold fury burned in his chest. Under the table? How deep did this go? Was this the kind of deal that had led to the fraud his father had always warned him about? The realization hit Michael like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a few shady deals. This was systematic. This was how the dealership had been operating now. And it wasn't just the management that was complicit. It was a culture of dishonesty, one that was infecting everyone, even the newest salesman who didn't seem to know any better. Eric's voice quivered as he spoke, like he knew he was saying things that could destroy everything he was trying to build in this company. His face grew paler, and his eyes darted around, searching for the manager, Dan, to see if he was nearby. He was trapped, and he knew it. Eric, eyes shifting, voice tight with fear. I'm just doing what they tell me, okay? It's not like I want to do this. Dan's the one who pushes the deals. He says it's the only way to make the real money around here." His voice dropped even lower. "But if you're not careful, Mr. Reynolds, things could get real messy. They got a way of making it disappear, you know? All those special fees, and they're not just here. They're across all the dealerships now." Michael could feel the weight of Eric's confession pressing down on him, the helplessness in his voice rattling his resolve. It wasn't just a few crooked deals. It was an entire system, a machine designed to deceive customers and fill the pockets of those at the top. Michael's thoughts raced. He had to document everything. This couldn't go unnoticed, not this time. The phone in his pocket felt like a lifeline. He didn't hesitate. His thumb slid over the screen, quickly opening the voice recorder app, his hands steady as he subtly tapped the record button. Every word was going to be saved. No one could ignore the truth once he had proof. As Eric rambled on, his anxiety spilling out in a flood of words, Michael could hear the desperation. The young salesman had bought into the lies, and now he was drowning in them. He didn't know how to escape, how to fix what he'd done, and Michael could hear it in the tremor of his voice. Eric, almost pleading, his eyes filled with guilt. "I swear, I didn't know it was going to be like this. I thought I could just sell cars, you know? But they said it was the only way to hit the numbers. If I didn't do it, I'd be out, just like the last guy." Michael's heart ached for Eric. He wasn't a bad kid. He was just caught in a system that had poisoned everything, turned everyone into pawns for corporate greed. But that didn't change what was happening. He had to make it stop. "Michael," quiet but firm, "you're not the only one stuck in this mess, but I'm going to fix this, Eric, starting right now." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I'll make sure the truth gets out. No more under-the-table deals. No more exploitation. I'm shutting it down." Eric's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, Michael saw a flicker of hope. The young salesman looked like he wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat. It was too late now. Michael had already made up his mind. He turned his attention back to the conversation between the elderly couple and Dan, but he couldn't shake the heavy feeling in his chest. This dealership, his family's legacy, was a shadow of what it used to be. But now Michael knew exactly what he had to do. As he prepared to confront Dan, Michael's grip tightened on his phone. The recording would be his weapon, the evidence he needed to put an end to this deception. He wasn't just going to fix this for himself. He was going to do it for every customer who had been lied to, for every salesman who had been manipulated into becoming part of the scam. Michael's voice was steady as he walked away from Eric, his mind already focused on the task ahead. He had a plan, and this time, there was no turning back. If stories like this matter to you, make sure to subscribe to Undercover Files. We uncover the truth behind corporate leadership and show what really happens when CEOs go undercover. Don't miss what happens next. The atmosphere in Dan's office was thick with tension. Michael stood tall, his calm demeanor belying the storm brewing inside him. Dan, the smug manager, was lounging back in his chair, as if he had all the time in the world. But Michael had been preparing for this moment. He knew this confrontation was coming, and he was ready to take back control of his family's legacy. Dan Reynolds, grinning, clearly unfazed. "So, Mike, you've got some concerns?" Michael's voice was low, measured, and unwavering, but every word carried the weight of years of deception. Michael, leaning forward, eyes narrowing. "Yeah, about these fees. They're not exactly legit, are they?" Dan's grin only widened, the kind of smile someone gives when they think they're untouchable. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, relishing in the perceived power he held. Dan Reynolds, mocking. "That's just business, Mike. Customers don't know what they don't know. And it's not like anyone's complaining, right?" Michael's gaze didn't falter. The calmness in his eyes only amplified the storm inside. Michael, quietly, his voice still calm but with a steely edge. "And the owner? He's okay with all of this?" Dan laughed, a loud, booming laugh, his voice echoing through the room. He didn't just think he had the upper hand. He was gloating, believing that no one could touch him. Dan Reynolds, laughing. "Michael Thompson?" The old man's too busy expanding his empire. He wouldn't notice a scam if it hit him in the face. He's got his hands full with bigger things. Michael's lips twitched into a smile, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was a smile that came with the knowledge of a devastating truth. Michael, calmly as he took a slow step toward Dan. "Well, Dan, he just did." In a single motion, Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He hit play, and suddenly Dan's own voice filled the room, loud, clear, and damning. The recording played back every shady tactic, every trick, every customer who'd been manipulated, every deal that had been pushed through under false pretenses. The words hung in the air like a noose tightening around Dan's neck. For a moment, the room was utterly still. The reality of what was unfolding began to sink in. Dan's face turned a sickly shade of pale as he stammered, his bravado evaporating in an instant. Dan Reynolds, stumbling over his words, eyes darting around the room. Wait. You don't understand. This isn't what you think. We were just..." But Michael didn't let him finish. His anger had been building, but now it was controlled, a force that cut through the air like a blade. He stepped forward, his presence dominating the space. "Michael," sharply, voice cold. "Dan Reynolds, you're fired. And if anyone else was involved in this, you better come clean now, because if I find out later, you're gone too." Dan opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his guilt crashing down on him. Michael turned to the employees, his eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to challenge him. One by one, the employees began to raise their hands, hesitant at first, then more assured as the truth poured out. They had been complicit. They had all been part of it in one way or another, some too afraid to speak up, others too greedy to care. The tension in the room was suffocating as the realization set in. This was the end of the line for many of them. Eric, standing near the back, looked like he wanted to disappear. His face was flushed with shame, his eyes darting to the ground. He stepped forward, his voice trembling with guilt. Eric, apologetic, eyes downcast. I didn't know it was this bad. I thought it was just part of the job. I never meant for it to go this far. Michael's gaze softened, just for a moment. He could see the guilt eating away at Eric, the realization that he had been a pawn in someone else's game. But there was no time for pity. Michael's mission was clear now. Michael, nodding, voice firm. It's not, and it's not too late to make it right, but you've got to stop pretending you didn't know. This ends here. The room was silent again, the weight of the moment hanging heavy. Dan, still standing, was trembling now, his facade crumbling. The room felt like it was closing in on him. His empire of lies had come crashing down, and there was no way out. Dan, desperately, voice breaking. Please, Mike, you don't know what you're doing. This is the only way we stay afloat. You're ruining everything. Michael's voice was ice cold as he locked eyes with Dan, his words cutting through the air like a final judgment. Michael, deadly calm. You ruined everything the moment you decided to lie. You didn't just hurt this company, you hurt people, and that's something I can't ignore. Dan stood frozen, helpless. The truth had come out. There was no escaping it now. Michael, turning to the others, his gaze sweeping across the room. From now on, this dealership will be built on honesty. No more under-the-table deals. No more exploiting anyone for profit. You want to be part of this company, you'll do it the right way. The finality of Michael's words hung in the air as the employees, some relieved, some unsure, slowly began to process what had just happened. The shift had begun, and there was no turning back. As Dan was escorted out by security, Michael's heart raced, but it wasn't with anger anymore. It was with resolve. He had just taken the first step in restoring his family's name. There was a long road ahead, but for the first time in a while, Michael felt like he was on the right path. The next day, Michael made a bold move. He called every customer who had been wronged, every family, every person who had been lied to or tricked into paying hidden fees. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about restoring their trust, their faith in something that had betrayed them. He sat at his desk, his phone pressed to his ear, listening to the surprised and sometimes emotional reactions of the customers on the other end. Some were hesitant at first, unsure of whether they could believe him. Others broke down in gratitude. Mark Henderson, the elderly man who had been scammed, was one of the first calls Michael made. Mark had been tricked into paying thousands more for his truck, forced into a high-interest loan he could never afford. When Michael called him, Mark's voice trembled as he picked up the phone. Mark Henderson, hesitant, almost unsure. Hello. Michael's voice was calm, but there was an intensity in it, a determination that Mark had never heard before. Michael Thompson, gently. Mr. Henderson, this is Michael Thompson, owner of Thompson Auto Group. I just wanted to personally apologize for the way you were treated. The deal you were given wasn't right, and I'm making it right today. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and then Mark's voice cracked with emotion. Mark Henderson, teary-eyed, shaky. You're really going to fix it? After all this time? Michael nodded, even though Mark couldn't see him. His heart ached for the elderly man who had been taken advantage of by someone who should have been trustworthy. Michael Thompson, firmly. I'll be refunding every fraudulent charge, Mr. Henderson. You'll get your truck at the original price, no hidden fees, no tricks, and you'll have an apology from me in person. It's the least I can do. Mark's voice broke as tears filled his eyes. Mark Henderson, choking up. You've just given me my dignity back. I never thought I'd see this day. Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He had done the right thing, but the weight of it all hit him in that moment. The responsibility, the trust, the families he was helping to heal. It wasn't just business, it was people, and that's what had been lost. But Michael wasn't done yet. He wasn't just going to right the wrongs of the past. He was going to build something stronger, something that would last. He made a commitment to transparency and honesty that would become the new foundation of Thompson Auto Group. Integrity would no longer be a luxury, it would be the heartbeat of his business. The next phone call was to Josh, the salesman who had been fired for trying to do the right thing. Michael had seen something in Josh during his undercover stint. The man had integrity. He had the values Michael wanted to build the company on. Michael called Josh personally, his voice firm, yet hopeful. Michael Thompson, sincerely. Josh, I want you back at Thompson Auto Group. You'll be leading our new ethical training program. You're the kind of person we need to rebuild this company. Will you come back? Josh's voice cracked as he responded, overwhelmed by the unexpected opportunity. Josh, gratefully, of course, Mike. I'm ready. Weeks passed and the dealership began to transform. Word spread quickly. Customers who had been burned began returning, drawn by the new culture of honesty and integrity that Michael had implemented. Even in a world where trust was often in short supply, Michael was determined to prove that it was still possible to do business the right way. The transformation wasn't immediate, but the change was real. People started coming in, eager to do business with a company they now trusted. They had seen the stories, heard the word of mouth, and believed that Thompson Auto Group was different. Months later, Michael stood outside Thompson Auto Group's flagship dealership. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on the building. The sign, once a symbol of greed, now represented a fresh start. Mark Henderson came by to personally thank Michael. Mark Henderson, tearfully, "You saved my family. You gave us a future." Michael smiled, shaking his hand. Michael Thompson, gratefully, "No, Mark. You reminded me why I started this business in the first place. Integrity in business isn't a luxury, it's a responsibility. And sometimes it takes going undercover to remind us why we built the company in the first place." Make sure to check other undercover CEO stories in the first comment.